There's a moment almost every man who builds things eventually experiences. You finish the project. The engine finally runs. The shelf is on the wall. The cabinet is finished. You stand there looking at it for a few seconds. And instead of thinking, "I'm finally done," your mind quietly asks, "What's next?" If you've ever spent weekends in a garage, you already know exactly what I mean. Nobody teaches you to think this way. Most people assume men keep building because they enjoy fixing things. After reading hundreds of comments from builders, mechanics, woodworkers, and garage owners, I don't think that's the reason at all. I think building satisfies something most modern life no longer does. And once you see what that is, you'll understand why one project is almost never enough. The first one surprised me the most. It started long before anyone picked up a wrench. The first thing I noticed had nothing to do with skill. It started much earlier. These men didn't just see something broken. They saw something worth fixing. An old engine, a motorcycle that hadn't run in years, something everybody else had already given up on. Most people walk past those things. These men stop. They look a little longer. Then a thought pops into their head. I think I can get this working again. At first, I thought that was the whole story. I thought these men simply enjoyed fixing things. But then I noticed something. When they talked about their projects, they hardly talked about the machine. Instead, they talked about how they felt. One man said he could lose track of time in the garage. Another said it was the only place his mind became quiet. Another admitted he didn't even need anything to be broken. He just liked having something to work on. That's when I realized they weren't looking for something to repair. They were looking for a reason to build. The real story was what happened to the man while he was working on it. And once I realized that, another pattern started showing up. Not in what they were fixing, but in where they were fixing it. That's when the garage itself became part of the story. One comment said, "The garage is my happy place." Then I saw another, and another. Different men. The exact same words. At first, I thought they were simply talking about the garage, the smell of oil, the old radio playing in the background. But then I realized it wasn't the garage they were talking about. It was what happened to them after they walked inside. Think about it. You walk into the garage carrying everything from the day. Work, bills. Your mind is all over the place. Then you pick up one wrench. You loosen one bolt. You start solving one problem. And for a little while, everything else disappears. Nothing else is asking for your attention. No emails, no meetings, no phone ringing every few minutes. Just one job, one problem, one solution. Maybe that's why so many men call it their happy place. Not because the garage is magical, but because life finally slows down. For a little while, your mind gets a break. Not by doing nothing, Saib, but by doing one thing. Maybe that's the kind of peace many men have been looking for all along, but even that didn't explain everything. Because if the garage is such a peaceful place, why do so many men keep going back? Why isn't one project enough? That answer didn't appear until I noticed another pattern, one that almost every builder described without even realizing it. The comments all pointed to the same thing. One project ends, and before long, another one begins. Not because the old project wasn't finished, because something felt missing. One man wrote, "The day I finish one project, I'm already looking for another." That comment stopped me, because he wasn't talking about fixing things. He was talking about needing something to wake up excited for tomorrow. There's a difference. Think about the last time you finished a project. You stood back, looked at it, and smiled. Then, a few days later, you found yourself walking into the garage, looking around, almost hoping something else needed your attention. Not because you wanted more work, because you missed having something to work toward. Maybe that's why men always seem to have another project waiting. It gives tomorrow a purpose. It gives your hands, and your mind, somewhere to go. But while I was reading those comments, another pattern quietly appeared. One that had nothing to do with starting a project or finishing one. It had everything to do with a single moment. The moment you step back, look at your work, and quietly say to yourself, "Yeah, I fixed that." The next thing I noticed had nothing to do with starting a project. It had everything to do with finishing one. Every builder knows this moment. You tighten the last bolt, wipe your hands, take one step back, and just stand there. For a few seconds, you don't say anything. You just look. Maybe it's an old truck. Maybe it's a motorcycle that finally runs. Maybe it's something much smaller. It doesn't matter, because for a moment, you can actually see what your time became. You can point at it. You can touch it. And without saying it out loud, just that you're thinking, I did that. That's a feeling that's becoming harder to find. These days, a lot of work disappears. You answer emails, sit in meetings. By the end of the day, it's hard to point at anything and say, I built that. Maybe that's another reason the garage means so much. It gives you something real, something you can hold, something that wasn't working yesterday, but is working today because you refused to give up on it. And while I was reading all these stories, I realized something. These weren't just garage stories, they were life lessons hiding inside everyday moments. That's one of the reasons we started putting these ideas together outside these videos. If you've been seeing yourself in today's video, you'll find our Builder's Field Guide in the description. And if you enjoy looking at ordinary life through a different lens, consider subscribing. We've only scratched the surface. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. Why do so many men choose old projects when buying something new would be easier? That answer surprised me the most. The next pattern was impossible to ignore. Again and again, men talked about fixing old things, old trucks, old tools. At first, I thought it was about saving money, but then I realized that wasn't it, because many of these men could have bought something newer, something easier. Instead, they chose the harder path. Why? Because buying something that already works doesn't tell you much about yourself. Bringing something back to life does. Every stuck bolt, every mistake, every problem you solve teaches you something. Not just about the machine, about yourself. You become more patient. You become more confident. You stop giving up so quickly. Maybe that's why these projects become so personal. They don't just fix old machines. Little by little, they shape the man standing beside them. But there was one final pattern, and it tied everything together. One pattern that explained why so many men keep coming back to the garage, year after year, even after all their projects are finished. The more comments I read, the more I noticed something that nobody came out and said directly. You had to read between the lines. The garage wasn't changing these men overnight. It was changing them a little at a time. Every project made him a little more patient, a little more confident, a little harder to shake. You stop getting frustrated every time something doesn't work, because you've learned something. Most problems can be solved. Sometimes you just have to slow down. Take another look. Try again. And after a while, you stop thinking that way only about machines. You start thinking that way about life. Maybe that's why so many men disappear into the garage after a hard day. They're not hiding from life. They're getting themselves ready to face it again. By now, I thought I understood everything. But one last pattern changed the way I looked at all of it. The last pattern wasn't about fixing things. It wasn't about peace. It wasn't even about having another project. It was much simpler than that. I realized the garage had become one of the few places where a man could still see the results of his own effort. You put in the time, you solve the problem, and something is better because you were there. That feeling is becoming rare. Maybe that's why one project is never enough, because the truck was never the real project. The motorcycle wasn't either. The real project was always the man. Every repair taught patience. Every mistake taught humility. Every finished project quietly reminded him, I'm still capable. I'm still learning. I'm still building. And maybe that's why, before the grease is even washed off your hands, you're already looking for the next project. Not because something else is broken, because something inside you comes alive every time you build. When I first started reading those comments, I thought I was reading about garages. Instead, I was reading about men, about purpose, about patience, about the quiet satisfaction that comes from making something just a little better than you found it. Maybe that's why the garage has never really been about the garage. It's one of the few places left where a man can slow down, work with his hands, solve one problem at a time, and leave knowing today mattered. But while I was reading those same comments, I stumbled onto another pattern, one that has nothing to do with garages, but reveals something just as interesting about the way men think. I'll show you that one next, and once you see it, you'll start seeing it everywhere.